Mike Pence pointed a trembling finger, his voice cracking with sanctimonious fury. "You are destroying the very foundations of our conservative economy." President Trump leaned into the microphone, his gaze like steel. "No, Mike, you sold the foundations. I'm just buying them back for the American people." The morning air in the nation's capital was crisp, but inside the Oval Office, a storm was brewing. President Donald Trump stood, arms crossed, staring at the large screen on the wall. On it, a new political ad played out, slick and deceptively patriotic. It featured his former Vice President, Mike Pence. Pence, looking earnest and grave, spoke in measured tones about economic recklessness and the dangers of abandoning time-tested free market principles. The ad, funded by Pence's newly formed Advancing American Freedom Advocacy Group, was a direct assault on President Trump's core America First agenda. It attacked his use of tariffs and his relentless push to bring manufacturing jobs back from overseas, framing them as chaotic and harmful. "See this, sir?" a young aide asked, his voice tense. "It's a 7-figure ad buy. They're targeting the Rust Belt." Trump didn't turn. He just nodded slowly, his eyes narrowed. "Globalist donors," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I can smell their money all over this. They had a good thing going for decades, shipping our jobs away, hollowing out our towns, all for an extra point on their stock price. Too, Mike. He was always more comfortable with them than with a steelworker from Pittsburgh." This wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a betrayal. Trump saw it clearly. Pence was positioning himself as the reasonable alternative, the darling of an establishment desperate to return to the old ways of global trade that had enriched a select few at the expense of millions. 3. He was using the language of conservatism to mask a surrender to foreign interests. Meanwhile, in a lavishly appointed boardroom across town, Mike Pence was the picture of confidence. He sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, surrounded by the very men who had funded his ad campaign, banking executives and CEOs of multinational corporations, their suits as expensive as their talking points. "The response has been tremendous," Pence said, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. "The media is framing it as a necessary course correction. They see you, they see us," as the adults returning to the room. One of the donors, a man who had made his fortune by moving his textile factories to Southeast Asia, nodded approvingly. "We need stability, Mike. Predictability. Donald's tariffs are disruptive. We need to get back to the pre-Trump consensus. Back to NAFTA-style agreements that understand the global flow of capital." Pour 5. Pence's expression hardened with arrogance. "Precisely. He doesn't understand that you can't turn back the clock. His America First policy is a fantasy. 6. A reckless one. We will expose it as such. Today, we've drawn a line in the sand." He felt a surge of power. He believed he was smarter, more principled. He believed he was saving the party from Trump's populist instincts. What he failed to realize was that the line he had drawn was not between two policies, but between the global elite and the American people. The news of Pence's campaign spread like wildfire through the media. Pundits on cable news lauded Pence's courage. They declared the beginning of a civil war for the soul of the Republican Party. Back in the White House, President Trump was not preparing a counter-ad. He was not planning a series of angry posts. He was preparing for a battle, but it would be on his terms. "Get the press secretary," he commanded. "Announce a live address from the East Room this evening on the economy, and get me 3 phone lines." For the next few hours, the West Wing was a hive of focused activity. The president wasn't shouting. He was directing. He made 3 personal phone calls to small towns in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The calls were not to governors or senators, but to people whose names would mean nothing to the powerful donors in Pence's boardroom. That evening, the East Room was packed. The air crackled with anticipation. The media expected a political dogfight, a blistering attack on his former vice president. They were about to be blindsided. President Trump walked to the podium, not with a scowl, but with a look of grim determination. He began not by mentioning Pence, but by talking about the American dream. For generations, the American dream was built on a simple, noble promise. He began, his voice steady and strong. That if you worked hard, you could build a good life for your family. You could walk down the street and see factories humming, communities thriving, and know that your children would have a better future right here in this country. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then, a different idea took hold. An idea sold to us in fancy boardrooms and at cocktail parties in foreign capitals. An idea championed by people who claimed to be smarter than you. They called it globalization. 3. They told you that shipping your job to another country was a good thing. They said that these trade deals, like NAFTA, written by lobbyists and for lobbyists, would make everyone richer. 2. He gestured to the side of the stage. Tonight, I want to introduce you to some people who were on the receiving end of that idea. Out walked 3 figures, a man in his late 50s named Frank, a woman in her 40s named Sarah, and a younger man named David. They weren't polished speakers. They were visibly nervous, but their eyes held a quiet dignity. Frank, a former auto worker from Michigan, spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. He described how the plant his father and grandfather had worked in was shuttered and moved to Mexico. 4. He spoke of the giant sucking sound that Ross Perot had warned about, and how his town had been devastated. 4. They didn't just take our jobs, he said, looking directly at the cameras. They took our pride. Sarah, a single mother from Ohio, told of how her job at a steel mill vanished, and how she had to work 3 part-time jobs just to keep her house. Her voice cracked as she spoke of the choice she faced: leave her home or watch her children grow up with no opportunities. Finally, David, a young man from Pennsylvania, spoke. He didn't have a story of a lost job, because the jobs were already gone by the time he graduated high school. He spoke of his friends lost to despair and an opioid crisis that feasted on economic hopelessness. The room was silent. The raw, unvarnished truth of their stories was more powerful than any political attack ad. President Trump stepped back to the podium, his face etched with a quiet anger. These are the forgotten men and women of our country. And they were not forgotten by accident. They were sacrificed on the altar of global profits by the very people who are now funding a campaign to take us back to those dark days. He looked directly into the camera lens, as if speaking to Pence himself. My predecessor talks about reckless policies. Was it not reckless to decimate the American auto industry? 4. Was it not reckless to tell millions of hard-working people that their lives, their communities, their families didn't matter as much as a corporate bottom line? Then came the masterstroke. The people attacking our America First agenda want to return to a policy of outsourcing. I want to double down on a policy of insourcing. That's why tonight I am officially directing my administration to launch the Hire American initiative. He laid out a bold, intelligent plan, a new set of tax incentives for companies that moved factories back to the U.S., a patriotic education program in schools celebrating American manufacturing, and a major investment in vocational training. It was strategic, forward-thinking, and directly challenged the narrative of chaos Pence was trying to sell. They are backed by the special interests who want to keep you down, Trump thundered, his voice rising with passion. I am backed by the American worker. And that is a fight we will win every single time. In his boardroom, Mike Pence watched, his face ashen. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. His phone began to buzz. It was one of the donors. He didn't need to answer to know what was being said. He hadn't been exposed by an attack. He had been dismantled by the truth. His carefully crafted image as a principled leader had been shattered, revealing him for what he was, a puppet for corporate interests who had profited from American decline. The public response was a tidal wave. Social media exploded with support for the president and for Frank, Sarah, and David. #YourAmerican became the #1 trend. Small business owners and workers saw a president who was not just fighting for them, but who understood their struggle. President Trump had won. It was not just a political victory. It was a moral one. He had held up a mirror to his opponent, and in the reflection, the entire country saw the clear difference between a leader who serves the people and a politician who serves the powerful. He had proven that true strength wasn't in bowing to the old ways, but in having the courage to build a new future for the nation he led. What did you find to be the most powerful moment in President Trump's address? The emotional stories of the workers, or the strategic unveiling of the Hire American initiative? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of conviction and consequence.